Hi, my name is Angelica Watson from the Links Incorporated. My freedom fighter is Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm, born in Brooklyn, New York, November 20th, 1924. The time has come to change America. Someday, somewhere, somehow, someone other than a white male could be president. When Shirley Anita St. Hill was 3 years old, her parents, Charles and Ruby, sent her and younger sisters Odessa and Muriel to the West Indian island of Barbados to live on their grandmother's farm. It was hard for Charles to earn a solid living on the meager salary he made as a baker's helper. Shirley's parents wanted to buy a house, and they wanted their daughters to have proper schooling. They didn't want to send their daughters away, but they thought letting grandmother Emily help raise their children was a way to save the money they needed and a chance to give Shirley and her sisters a good education. Grandmother Emily's sunny village was a far cry from the streets of Brooklyn, the New York City borough where Shirley was born. The St. Hill girls missed their parents, but they took to island life well, and they were well taken care of. Grandmother Emily insisted that each child do her share of farm chores. She also saw to it that Shirley and her sisters attended church regularly. On Sundays, when it came time to dress in their finest clothes and walk the 2 miles to worship services, Shirley, Odessa, and Muriel went along willingly with their grandmother. Sundays were special to Shirley because after church, their Aunt Myrtle and Uncle Lincoln and Shirley's cousins and neighbors gathered for supper. Sunday dinners were rich with fruits and vegetables from the island. When Shirley was 4 years old, Grandmother Emily enrolled in school held in the village church. This school was a traditional British-style school common in Barbados. The teachers didn't tolerate anyone who wasn't serious about learning. It was not the place for complaining, back talk, or making faces. 7 classes, set apart only by chalkboards, met in the same room. Shirley learned with children of all ages. Even as a little girl, she was a good student. She could read and write clearly by the time she was 5 years old. Back in Brooklyn, Shirley's parents were blessed with another daughter, Selma, but they had suffered financial hardship during the Great Depression. And after the birth of their 4th child, they realized they could not afford to buy a house. 7 years had passed since they'd taken Shirley, Odessa, and Muriel to Barbados. They felt it best to bring their family together again. Shirley was 10 years old when she and her sisters returned to Brooklyn. She was glad to be reunited with her mother and father and was happy to meet baby Selma for the first time. But there wasn't much else in New York City to put a smile on Shirley's face. After all, New York was crowded and it was cold. And to make matters worse, Shirley had to start school in the 3rd grade. In Barbados, she had been in classes that were equivalent to 6th grade. But because she had not been taught American history or geography, the teachers at her school, PS 84, held her back. School became drudgery for Shirley. She could read and write circles around most kids her age, let alone 3rd graders. Thanks to one observant teacher who saw that Shirley was a bright child and suggested that she have a private tutor, Shirley caught up in the subjects that she hadn't learned. At home, Shirley received a valuable education too. Though her parents had little formal schooling, they taught her lessons that would shape her future in ways no classroom could. Shirley's father loved to read. Even on his small salary, he always purchased several newspapers each day. It was so important to Charles St. Hill that he and his daughters understood world events and the happenings in their own community, especially issues that affected the rights of Black people. Shirley's father was a follower of Marcus Garvey, a civil rights leader from Jamaica. Charles St. Hill impressed upon his children the importance of learning African American history. Both Shirley's parents encouraged her to visit the Brooklyn Public Library to find books about Black men and women who had devoted themselves to the struggle for racial justice. The library became a friend to Shirley. There, she took a special interest in how Harriet Tubman had led so many slaves to freedom along the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman's accomplishments showed Shirley that women could be leaders, that a single Black woman could lead legions of people, even when a mountain of obstacles stood in her way. In 1942, Shirley graduated from Girls High School in Brooklyn. Her good grades had put her at the top of her class. Soon after graduation, she enrolled at Brooklyn College, where she learned that there was more to education than bookwork. For Shirley, college was a lesson in Black pride. She had hoped to become a teacher, but college introduced a new idea. During her second year at Brooklyn College, Shirley joined the Harriet Tubman Society, a civil rights club whose members met regularly to discuss ways to lessen the racial tensions between Black people and white people. Shirley had lots of good ideas for helping African Americans gain equality. She spoke up at club meetings and during her classes, and she listened to the views of others, whether they agreed with her side of things or not. Once, a white politician came to Brooklyn College to speak to the students. In his speech, he said, "Black people will advance someday, but Black people are always going to need white people leading them." This comment made Shirley very angry. Even before the man was done speaking, Shirley decided that she was not going to accept such stupidity. Shirley's friends, both Black and white, began to point out her talents for encouraging others, organizing groups, speaking in public, and putting her ideas into action. Then one of Shirley's favorite teachers, political science professor Louis Warsoff, a white man who was blind, encouraged Shirley to consider a career in politics. Shirley appreciated Professor Warsoff's suggestion, but dismissed it quickly. To her, a political career was a far-fetched notion. She told her professor, "You forget that I am Black, and I'm a woman." But then Shirley remembered how angry it made her that some people believed African Americans could not lead themselves. And she remembered all she learned about Harriet Tubman's courage. Professor Warsoff helped Shirley set her eyes on the prize of a life in politics. She began to attend meetings of local political groups. She discovered that a political career meant taking the lead in helping others make positive changes in their communities. It meant working to change the laws and government policies that affected housing, schools, healthcare, and of course, race relations. After graduating from Brooklyn College in 1946, Shirley worked as a teacher at Mount Calvary Child Care Center in Harlem. She enrolled at Columbia University, where she took night courses towards a master's degree in education. The Columbia's master program required hard work and long study hours, but Shirley met the challenge, and she met a smart study companion, a dashing Jamaican man who was also earning a master's degree at Columbia. His name was Conrad Chisholm. He and Shirley became good friends. Conrad had an easygoing way about him, and he was bright and ambitious like Shirley. In 1949, Shirley and Conrad married and settled in Brooklyn. Shirley continued her work as a teacher. At that time, her interest in politics continued to grow. It grew out of what Shirley observed every time she attended a meeting of the local Democratic Party. She saw that Black people were considered second-class citizens by many members of the party, and that when an African American presented an idea, it was ousted right away. For Black women who attended Democratic Party meetings, it was worse. Black women weren't even considered second-class citizens. They weren't considered at all. For Shirley Chisholm, a well-spoken, intelligent woman who was always brimming with good ideas, this was unacceptable. Rather than continue attending Democratic Party meetings, only to feel belittled and useless, Shirley helped the Unity Democratic Club, a group of Black men and women who, like Shirley, had interest in politics. As much as Shirley enjoyed sharing her political views with other African Americans, she discovered that sexism was just as prevalent among Black men as it was among white men. In 1964, when Shirley decided to run for office in the New York State Assembly, the Unity Club men told her that she, as a woman, could certainly take part in club activities, but running for public office was best left to the men. Well, these foolish attitudes did not stop Shirley. They had the opposite effect. She launched her own campaign and won the election. As New York's second Assemblywoman, a woman named Bessie Buchanan was the first. Shirley wasted not 1 minute of time putting her appointment into action. She introduced several important bills that became laws, including one that increased unemployment benefits for domestic workers, such as housekeepers and cooks. People began to see that Shirley Chisholm was serious about making a difference. She was elected to the state assembly for a second term and created a bill to start a program called SPEAK, which gave college scholarships to Black high school students. Shirley was on a steady climb. Her success in the state assembly encouraged her to run for Congress. In 1968, she ran for a seat for the 12th Congressional District of Brooklyn, a new district that included the community of Bedford, Stuyvesant, a neighborhood where Shirley grew up. But in her race for Congress, Shirley faced a tough opponent, a Republican candidate named James Farmer, one of the founders of the Congress for Racial Equality, CORE. James Farmer was a well-known civil rights activist who was as outspoken as Shirley. During the campaign, he publicly questioned Shirley's abilities. He told voters that a man, not a woman, could best represent Brooklyn's 12th district in Congress. Shirley let James brag all he wanted. His platform helped her build a strong campaign based on her greatest strength, being a woman. After all, who primarily organized the day-to-day duties of a household? Women. Who managed most school classrooms? Women. Who were experts in childcare? Women. And it was women who voted Shirley Chisholm into Congress, allowing her to beat out James Farmer 2-1, and elected Shirley as the first Black woman to serve in the House of Representatives. As a Congresswoman, Shirley worked hard on behalf of her district. She helped people in Bedford-Stuyvesant find jobs, she fought discrimination, and spoke out for the rights of poor people and children. And she showed her Brooklyn neighbors how to navigate the web of government agencies that set policies for housing, education, and health services. When Shirley's first term in Congress ended, she ran for re-election and won. She would serve in Congress for a total of 7 terms, from 1968 to 1982. In 1970, as the 1972 presidential election approached, Shirley's friends and supporters urged her to run for president of the United States. Shirley shrugged off her friend's suggestion. How could she run for president? She achieved success in Congress, but running for president was a very different story. Presidential candidates need money to run for their campaigns. They need a staff of devoted workers to help their campaigns going, and they need votes. But more and more, people kept pressing Shirley to run. And soon their desire to see Shirley to go for it rubbed off. She decided to enter the race and give it all she had. She was the first African-American woman ever to seek a presidential nomination from a major political party. In order to run for president, Shirley first needed to win enough votes to become elected as a Democratic Party presidential candidate. Then, if elected to represent the Democratic Party, she would run against the Republican presidential candidate. In 1972, Richard Nixon, a Republican, was the president of the United States, and he intended to run for re-election. Several Democrats, all white men, sought the Democratic Party nomination, but there were Senators Hubert Humphrey from Minnesota, George McGovern from South Dakota, and Edmund Muskie from Maine. Shirley knew she was an underdog in the race, but that didn't matter to her. What was most important was that she stuck to her belief that she had just as much to offer to the American people as any of the candidates. Shirley traveled from state to spread her message. She told people, "The time has come to change America. Someday, somewhere, somehow, someone other than a white male could be president." On January 25th, 1972, Shirley Chisholm officially announced her candidacy. She said, "I am not the candidate of Black America, although I am Black and proud. I am not the candidate for the women's movement of this country, although I am a woman. I am a candidate of the people. Although Shirley won the support of many, she lost the Democratic nomination to Senator George McGovern. But Shirley didn't see her loss as a defeat. The fact that she had entered the race was a victory to her. Because of Shirley, many Black people registered to vote for the first time in their lives. Many women who had always left politics to men took active roles in the political process. When the election was over, Shirley told newspaper reporters that her campaign opened doors to future candidates who may not have otherwise run. It wasn't long before others took Shirley's lead. In 1984, Geraldine Farrow, a white congresswoman from Queens, New York, ran for vice president of the United States. Jesse Jackson, a Black Baptist minister from Greenville, South Carolina, ran for president twice, once in 1984 and again in 1988. Shirley's example paved the way for Geraldine and Jesse, and it proved to everyone else that a little girl from Brooklyn, whose parents could not afford to buy a home, could dare to dream of becoming the #1 tenant of the White House. Shirley had been right. America was changing.